can you picture the whole history that's covered in the Bible, in the biblical narrative, from creation to the first century when Jesus was on earth, from creation to the first century, so it's about 4,000 years. And if I were to ask you to break it down into sections, what kind of sections would there be?
Flood would be a section.
So the first obvious one would be,
Up to the flood.
creation to the flood. This is the first. And according to the biblical data, 1,656 years passed. Then, what would be the second portion of history? How would you describe it? And where would it end?
Is the Exodus? To the Exodus?
Exodus?
Or beginning of Israel, what, to Abraham maybe, or to Jacob?
Okay. What's similar in during this period of time between the flood and, let's say, Exodus? What would Exodus? It's when the Jews came out of Egypt, right?
Babylon and Tower. One more thing.
Well, it was right after the flood, basically.
Yeah.
But you see, this period is usually called the patriarchal period, meaning that the form of government there was no state per se. There was no country where God's people would live. So they were ruled by patriarchs, meaning that the old wise people who were God's prophets and God's priests. So this patriarchal period goes. If we were to start, at the flood, then it would go to the creation of the state of Israel, right? And it was created at 15th century before Christ, so 15th century BC, and then the next period would be
Israel. Well,
the history of Israel.
From
So
Egypt.
when God's people, they become a state, they became organized.
Nation.
Yeah, so it's the period of nation of Israel. But then, unfortunately, this period also ended. It lasted for about 10 centuries. So, but in the 5th century BC, they went into captivity. And after that, they all were dependent basically all the time on other superpowers around them, whether it was Babylonians or Medo-Persians or Greeks or Romans. So they never quite achieved the same independent status that they used to have. And then there is a period of the first century where when church was created and when new era began. So when I was thinking about the characters that we would choose in order to learn from them, I pictured this whole history perspective, and I decided to choose one person out of each phase of history. So first period was pre-flood, then patriarchal period, then would be the theocracy, the state of Israel, and then when they lost it, captivity, and then which would bring us to the time of Christ. And since we have 5 meetings and 4 of them are here, we should be able to find one person from each period of time that would be a good fit, that would relate, or whose experience would relate to us. So last time we dealt with whom?
No.
With Noah. It's a fascinating figure. And we only covered maybe, I don't know, maybe like 20% of what could be covered about him. From what I know, currently.
Only 500 years to wait.
And but today I would like to offer you another character, and it's Joseph. So let's start with the book of Genesis, chapter 37, and we'll be doing the reading, one by one. Genesis chapter 37, verses 2 through 4. Okay? And you could use any language or any version of the Bible that you have. Genesis 37, verses 2 through 4. Daniel, are you ready? Genesis 37, 2 through 4. One verse.
These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report for them to their father.
3 and then 4.
Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age. He made him a varicolored tunic.
When Joseph's brothers saw their father love him more than any of them, they hated Joseph and were not able to speak to him kindly.
Okay, so let's see what is revealed here in these 3 verses. First of all, the age of Joseph is given.
17.
Yeah. Do we have anybody younger than 17? 16. 16? Guys, you look like 21. So only 2 people? Oh, you are 4. Okay, we have 4. And is there anybody that's more than 10 years older than 17?
27. Sasha is 27. Sasha is 27.
You are?
26.
Okay. Well, the reason that I am asking is that the age gap is sometimes a gap that's a difficult one to cross, to bridge, in terms of relating to a person's experience. But this group should be okay, right? Of course, it would have been extremely difficult to relate to Noah's, but you need to scale it to the lifespan of today's people, and then you have a proportion that would reflect how old he was and so on. Well, anyhow, so we should be okay in terms of relating to his experience. Let's clarify the pronunciation of the names given here. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to have trouble. So we have, Joseph is pretty easy, then Israel as well, but then there are 2 female names. How would you pronounce them?
Bilhah and Zilpah.
Yes, you don't pronounce H at the end of those names. Okay, to give you an example, Moriah. You don't say Moriah.
And then Noah.
Or Noah, you don't say Noah. Well, you do in Russian, but not in English. So it's Bilhah and Zilpah, right? 2 names. And who are they? The Bible says that Joseph was spending time with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah.
Polygamist.
Huh?
Polygamist.
Well, father's wives.
What kind of wives?
Наложницы.
Concubines. So he had two wives. He had who? Leah
Oh, yeah.
and
Rachel.
Rachel. Those were his wives. And then in addition to that, he had these, wives.
But there was a choice of wives to have two more. His wives are the ones who actually offered to have.
I don't even go there because
Concubines.
it's a different story. But you see, these concubines, they were slaves. That's the point. So when we look at Joseph's family, we see that there were classes of wives, and then there were classes of descendants of those wives. So children were, in different categories. And of course, Leah was she had the most of descendants. She in that hierarchy, she was the most prominent. Then Rachel came. She had only two sons, and then these concubines, these slaves, they were even lower. And you could see it very clearly depicted when Jacob is getting ready to meet his brother Esau, who has 400 men with him, armed, and is anxious to get even, with his brother who deceived him and so forth. And so when Jacob is getting ready to meet Esau, he structures his camp in a very specific way. So let's read about that. It would be in Genesis chapter 33. Starting with verse 1. Well, basically 1 and 2. If you could, pick up and carry on. Genesis chapter 33, verses 1 and 2.
Jacob looked up and saw that Esau was coming along with 400 men, so he divided his children among Leah, Rachel, and 2 female servants.
He put the maids and their children in the front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last.
Thank you.
Wow, I never noticed it.
Why did he structure his camp this way?
To get killed first.
So those who are of least value, are up front.
Hopefully those children were too young to remember later.
I don't think so. I don't think so. They were pretty, pretty grown up already. Yeah, I mean, it explains a lot, right? So Rachel and Joseph, because Benjamin was not born yet, he was born on the way back. They were the last ones, so they were the precious, the most, and of course Jacob was the very last. It shows you, the way this community, this family was structured. And knowing this, we could get a little more of a perspective on the picture given here. So you see, it says that, we are going back to chapter 36, 37, Genesis 37, verses 2 through 4. And it says that he was spending time, he was pasturing, taking care of the flocks with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, with the sons of those slaves or maids or servants, right? And then what did he do? The end of verse 2, chapter 37, verse 2.
He tells his father everything. The other
He
sons.
provides
Reported everything.
like a bad report about them.
Bad report about them.
That's scary.
In the Russian language, there is a term ябедничать. Who is ябеда?
Шестерка.
Who is шестерка?
The one who tells everything to the parents.
Yeah, he was telling on them.
Tattletale.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember.
Tattletale.
Yeah, when my firstborn was, learning, was going to the school, and the teacher would explain the difference between reporting and tattletaling. That's the right pronunciation.
Yeah, tattletale.
Tattletaling. So we had hard time distinguishing between the two. What's the difference? But the idea is that he would tell his father bad stuff, bad things about the sons of the maids. So you could see the attitude. Would you think that the reports were true?
Sure. Probably, yeah.
Maybe they were exaggerating a little bit.
The Bible doesn't tell us.
See, in
Right.
Russian it says sluki, which makes it sound like vessel.
Yeah,
But I don't think that's the right translation.
but that's by the way, the best way to deal with it, to ask if it is an accurate translation, right? So what does sluhi mean?
Gossiping.
Huh?
Gossiping.
Gossip in
Gossiping.
Russian.
Okay, I could tell you what the original says. It literally means whispering.
Oh, that's why in New Testament is not called pretty good. Or in
Here's the word. It's Hebrew word diba, and the translation is whispering, defamation, evil report. So he was. When would you whisper instead of just speak normally?
when it's not true.
Or what's in private.
No, yeah, if you don't want them to hear it.
Yeah, but why do you don't want them to hear? Because it's not true.
Not exactly.
Negative about them.
So
Or you're scared to get beaten up.
we are not completely sure, but what we do know for sure, that Bible prohibits this kind of behavior. It says that we are prohibited to share any negative information, which is described here as bad reports, to a third party, so to speak. So we're first to face the person with any things that we have against him or her. We need to face that person and share our concerns and express why we are worried and try to work it out, try to talk it over and so forth. And then if it doesn't help, then we could enlist some godly and experienced and wise people to help, right? And if it doesn't help, then the Bible says you could tell it to the church, and then the church will deal with the person. So the way Joseph was behaving reflected this hierarchy that was created in the family. So he basically showed his he made things worse. Let's put it this way. Already there was a lot of tension because there were those four women in the family, different kids, different status of each kid, and he made things worse. But instead of talking to his son and saying, "Hey, listen, son, no, this is not the right thing to deal with it. Let's deal with it biblically." Well, there was no Bible at that time, but we will see that there was. see it later today. The father instead does what? Verse number 3.
Love him more.
Yeah.
Made him special tunic.
He made him, well, it does say that he loved him more than his other sons. And then he made him a special garment, special clothes. Do you like Seva's clothes today?
Yeah.
Isn't it colorful? The reason I'm picking on him is because he's the most colorful, I believe. Well, Daniel is
Really good too.
yeah, but I mean, in terms of being colorful, probably this is something that Joseph wore. And what's the big deal about it?
Colors were expensive back then.
It's just the fact that it's different from everybody else.
Okay.
Well, what I was thinking that he probably was reporting bad things that they did to him, to Joseph. That Joseph was like saying, "Hey, they did bad things to me." So what father did, he kind of gave him cool clothes, so they will see that you can touch him. He's special. So that's what I was thinking.
Okay. What would be equivalent to this colorful robe in our days?
What?
Armani, Gucci, Prada.
I think it would be close to be like a nice car. If your dad gives you nice clothes, it's not gonna make it special. But if he buys you like a nice car, that's what's gonna stand out. Clothes means nothing.
Well, we actually do know what it meant. Because there is this phrase in the Bible that's used again in 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 18. So whoever is next, please read it. 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 18.
Yes.
Okay, what's the verse? 18?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 Samuel 13:18.
Now she was wearing a long robe, for this is what the king's virgin daughters used to wear. So Amnon's attendant removed her and bolted the door behind her.
Oh, what does your version say? What kind of robe she?
Long robe.
Long.
Mine says ornate.
Or
Sweet.
Ornate. It's like one word. That's what it said in the other Gloa that we were reading.
Okay.
It
So
says the same.
it's the same word.
Yeah.
Well, the Russian. Okay.
And she had a garment of diverse colors upon her.
Yeah, that's
And then the New King James says robe of many colors.
many colors. So it's the same term. And so who would wear these kind of garments?
Virgin
daughters
daughter
of the king.
Well, king's daughter and sons, I guess.
King's daughters. So it was a way to distinguish them in the society and to show that they have this status of being king's daughters. And we have this biblical evidence, and also there are some archaeological there is some archaeological data that says that this robe of many colors was mark of the people who were rulers and who had prominent position in their society. So it was a special garment that showed that he is above everybody else. So we see that the father wanted to make him basically a successor. So we will not talk about the fact that when you have your sons and daughters, you are prohibited to do this kind of stuff. It's very damaging. But when putting all of this together, how would you characterize Joseph? What would you call him, or how would you?
Spoiled.
Yeah, a spoiled child. Spoiled child. He was treated in a special way by his father, and it was reflected in the way he treated his brothers, in the way he behaved, and all of that. it's a bad situation. You know, it's not the best set of circumstances to have when you are 17 years of age. You could end up like some of the Justins, you know, in our society and others before. If you know what I mean. He hasn't finished yet, but you know, what he's doing right now, it's pretty bad.
You just got that.
So, okay. We could talk more about this, but I think the general picture is clear. Now, what did he get for this kind of words, attitude, and you know, disposition in his family? Yeah, isn't it? What's the term? Could you expect this kind of turnout?
Yeah.
Of course.
Now makes more sense of when they hated him.
Yeah, and you see, when father gave him this role, it looked like father wants him to be the main one, the very special child. But when he began telling his dreams about, there were two dreams, sheaves of grain were bowing down to his sheaf, and then stars were bowing down to his star.
And the moon and sun.
So to the brothers, it was evident that he himself has these kind of ambitions as well. So when they put all of this together, in our passage it says that they could not speak to him kindly, or they could not continue good relationships with him. So when the opportunity presented itself, they just got rid of him. They sold him to slavery. Okay. Anybody wants to picture an application for us today, based on what we have learned already? Yeah, practical. How would this information help you today?
Well, don't hate the brothers as much.
First of all, like, don't gossip and tattletale on people. Then don't like have a favorite among your children.
Don't have many wives or husbands.
Don't think about yourself as a one
Yeah.
better than others.
Don't get your ego high.
And don't wear coal for clothing.
Okay. Because?
He'll get sold to slavery. Because something will happen to humble you.
I think that's the way it goes. Something will happen. So what did happen? Quickly. First they wanted to kill him,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But then one of the brothers rescued him and said, let's,
Whose son? One of the brothers was Leah's son.
Judah.
So those two groups of sons of the other wives, they were hating on Joseph, but the son of Leah tried to save him.
It was other Leah's sons who
Yeah.
wanted to slow to.
Yeah, I think it's based on age.
Okay.
Reuben was the first born. He was in charge. He wanted to save him. But I mean, because he was the oldest one, he probably had his family already at that time. And we can calculate it, but we just don't have that. So anyhow, they sold him to slavery to Egypt, and can you imagine Joseph being brought as a slave? So from being a prince and an heir to all the riches, being the loved one, the most important one, to become a slave.
So he was 17 when the situation with the clothes happened.
Yeah.
How old was he when he was sold to slavery? Do you know?
Oh, well, the narrative goes
15.
uninterrupted. So about that age, it's not specifically stated, but
Он женился где-то в 30, насколько я понимаю.
yes, he was 30 when he got married. Yeah.
А есть описание, сколько он в Египте проводил?
We have only the 70-year mark and then the 30-year mark. So this is the only chronological data that's available. So
And then
13 years.
7 years in prison, or like in between there are some.
Yeah. But the narrative goes without interruption. So we assume that he was 17 when he got to Egypt. Then. Chapter 39. Let's read verses 7 through 12. Genesis 39, verses 7 through 12. Okay, who's turn to read?
And after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me."
But he refused. With me in charge, she told her, "My master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care."
No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?
And it came to pass, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened. Okay, sorry, wrong version. Even though she continued to speak to Joseph day after day, he did not respond to her invitation to have sex with her.
One day he went into the house to do his work when none of the household servants were there in the house.
One more.
12,
She grabbed him by his outer garment, saying, "Have sex with me." But he left his outer garment in her hand and ran outside.
Thank you. So here we see hope. Hope for those spoiled children. Though obviously he was not raised the best way, right? And though obviously his family wasn't a model family, there were many problems with the whole setup and the things happened to them. Still, he was brought up in a family that knew God, knew His will, and they worshiped God. The Bible says this clearly. So and it happens often today. You see a teenager or a young person, going out there and doing whatever he or she wants, and not obeying God, and basically just taking advantage of his parents' money or her parents' money and influence and opportunities, wasting time, and just doing the things that are against God's will. But still, what he learned in Bible school, in the church, in school, from his parents, from the sermons, those 2 or 3% that he paid attention to, those seeds, they are still in him. And sometimes when God creates this humbling experience, when a person comes to his or her senses and begins to see the real life and real values, and all of this which is outwardly and superficial goes away, when there is a real problem, a real situation those seeds, they begin to grow and bring fruit. And I know that, I mean, do you know this kind of stories when young people were not, that straight in terms of being in God's will and doing God's things, doing their own thing, but then something happened, whether there was a car crash, whether there was some sickness, whether there was some other tragedy, or he or she had to take care of himself or herself by working hard, earning money, and paying bills and so forth. So when real life comes at you, then those good seeds of God's will and parental advice and so forth begin to grow and bring fruit. Do you know those stories?
I heard something.
There was even a story in the Portland when they had conference last year.
Yes.
There was a guy who said the same story about car crash.
But the question is, do you need car crashes? Or being, a slave, any kind of slave? There are different forms of slavery. I mean, do you really need that to bring, the good out of you? So my question is, why wait till you go to the bottom before actually using everything good that's in you and is available to you? Unfortunately, Joseph had to go through this very humbling experience to realize what's important. And praise God, he did realize, right? So when we look at this passage, when we look at the way he handled the temptation, we see God's victory in his life. So let's take a closer look at this experience. So he has an offer of having sex with an experienced woman. He is a virgin. And, if you ask people out there on the street, if you ask young people, oh, would you appreciate this kind of opportunity? Majority say, of course. I mean, to be able to be taught by a professional and start it out right and so forth. I'm just repeating, what's out there. It's a great chance, right? So many people would be thankful. Many young people would be thankful for this kind of offer and would appreciate this opportunity. So they would treat it as an opportunity. But Joseph replies unexpectedly. Verse 9. He says, how can I do this great evil and sin before the Lord? Right? So this is one of the texts that show that they did know God's commandments. Right? Up before that time, there is no commandment, you shall not commit adultery. There is no commandment, you should keep your virginity till your wedding date. There is no such law, there is no such a commandment. But based on his reaction, on Joseph's reaction, we see that he did know that these laws and these commandments existed. So the nature of this kind of sins is twofold. First of all, he says, I could not sin against whom?
Master.
The master.
Yeah, because you are his wife. So it's a sin against a person, and then also it's a sin against God. So his reaction tells us that he has matured as a result of of hitting the bottom and becoming a slave. What would you do? Just picture the situation. You are far away from home. Well, when you look at the map, Palestine of those times and Egypt are not that far. But at that time, it is quite far because of the travel opportunities and so forth. But mostly because of the fact that nobody knows where he is. So you do know that nobody will ever find you, right?
And plus, it's a country that didn't keep good, things like they didn't care about sleeping around with other people, so it was normal.
Of course. Moreover, the religion of Egypt encouraged that. The religion of Egypt had a sex cult, and the idea was that the more sex people have, the more fruitful the land is. So those gods and goddesses of fertility, the way to serve them would be to just have it the way you want it. And in those Egyptian religious texts, we see homosexuality, we see incest, we see generally perversions of different kinds and so forth. So the culture around him says, hey, young man, everybody is doing that, and you have this great offer. Why don't you use it? So the fact that he was in a foreign country, in foreign culture, and no one would ever find out about this. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What would you do when you know that basically there will be no consequences? That's a tough question, right? And
so what if he actually did have sex with her? Does that mean there's gonna be like no records after that? Like how do they know?
You mean records where?
I mean like how do people know that there's an offer?
He was thrown in jail though.
Yeah, like there's an offer given to him. Like how do people know that?
People around him?
Yeah.
How do we
Who was
know
there to witness?
Yeah,
what
witness.
happened?
that he actually did not have a sex and he actually ran away? That's
So
the question.
you are asking about whether the biblical account is accurate?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying like, what if he did have it? Like would there still be a record of it?
Like
Uh,
that he was
If
like
you
in the
would
Bible?
have it,
The Bible would tell us. I mean, because every time sin happens, the Bible describes it.
I guess it's the matter of question if the history would stay the same after he would have it. If he would go to jail, if he would become remembered by the king and then brought up to the kingdom. That
We will deal with this today, a little bit later. But you see, the chance was that no one was in the house, right? No one was in the house, only him and her. So no human except the two of them would know. So in this sense there would be no record, but he knew. So his father would not know, his family, his brothers, no one from that religious community would know, and not anybody, even in the Egypt community would know, except for God. Right? So his reaction was based not on the fact of whether it will be on the fact how people would react towards him after that, but just based on the nature of this act. He says it's an evil thing before the Lord. And to make things worse, verse 10, she says that she was doing this every day. Can you imagine this? Verse number 10.
Day after day.
Yeah, day after day. So she would have these proposals.
Это говорит о том, что с мужем плохой контакт был.
Not just the culture only, but like
Надо было Иосифу проповедовать мужу.
Well, he was the guard of the master of the guards, so he was probably really busy, like truck driver.
all husbands are very busy, you know, unless, and of course, when you read it further, the fact that he did not kill Joseph, I mean, the fact that the husband didn't kill Joseph shows that he knew that she was lying. But I mean, it's a sideline. So she would offer herself to him daily, and it's an enormous pressure. I don't know if you have experienced at least something of this sort or not. I remember once I was 16 years of age, and I went to one of the former republics of Soviet Union, and there was a Christian camp during the summer, and there was one specific lady that would chase me, you know, hourly, especially closer to the, you know, dark time of the day, and would offer herself, you know, hourly. It was a real test of faith and morals. I was not prepared to meet this kind of behavior in a Christian camp. It was terrible. So I can only have pity for Joseph when you know, he had to live daily in this kind of atmosphere. So what was his reaction? Verse number 10 says that he did not want to sleep with her, or to have sex with her, or to be with her. And of course you could interpret the verb be differently. But of course he could not be with her like officially being in a relationship, right? It had to be a secret. So to be needs to be interpreted as just spending time with her. He did not. He understood that not only having sex with her would be a sin, but spending time with her, being close to her, is also a no-no, because you know, the longer you stay in a situation which is tempting, the longer you look at the screen, or you know, at the page, or stay at the place where there is a temptation, the more likely you will sin. Because the research shows that the willpower has the same nature as any other power or strength in the body. So let's say you just completed a 10-mile marathon, and right after that there is another challenge. You need to run a 5-mile marathon. Your strength is drained. So it's the same way with willpower. If you are strong at one instance, then at the second, and the third, and the fourth, then on the 10th one, you are weak. Your willpower is very weak. There is a science behind.
So it actually runs out, like it's like a
It
battery.
does. And then, so it depletes each time you make the right decision. You drain your willpower.
Go away from me, I have 1% left.
Yeah,
How do you recharge?
That's the idea. It recharges daily, like our physical strength. But if you know throughout the day you are in a place where you have to make the right decision and withstand temptation on a constant basis, then it's most likely that you would sin. So that's why he said no to her and no to being around her, because it was a temptation. And verse number 12, what did he do? Eventually, he
Forced him.
He tried to force it.
he just ran away. He ran away.
She cried.
That's the best strategy, guys, and everybody else. that's the best. If you know that there is a person who is talking you into sin, the sin, this sin or any other sin, just stop being around that person. You know, sometimes guys want to be gentlemen, and they say, I just want to have this last meeting with her, and I would explain everything to her. I would say that we're breaking up, and you know, this is sin and so forth, and we won't meet ever again. And so he goes there, and he sins there. Just don't go there. Text her, or write her a letter, or call her, but just cut all the communication lines. Just don't be there. Yeah, it's so the best strategy is to flee. Just again, don't be around that place or that person that's tempting you to sin. And the Bible says a lot about this, and many times. Like for example, flee from sexual immorality. It's 1 Corinthians 6:18. 1 Corinthians 6:18. Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Flee. That's the best strategy. Okay. We see a spoiled child who had to be brought down to realize what is important in his life. And praise the Lord, he did. It's very interesting to realize that the verbiage that's used in the Bible to describe his life reflects what was happening spiritually in his life. Genesis 39:1. Could read it, please. 39:1. Genesis 39:1.
Первый стих, да? Иосиф же отведен был в Египет, и купил его из рук измаильтян, приведших его туда. Египтянин Потифар, царь-творец фараона, начальник телохранителей.
I'm sorry for Dennis to having him read the whole verse. We basically need the first couple of words. So, Иосиф же отведен был в Египет. What does the English say?
Brought down.
Brought down.
Taken down.
Taken down. So this is the literal translation. He was brought down. Yeah, and it has double meaning, of course. When you look at the map, Egypt is lower. It's south of Palestine. So he brought down, meaning went southward. But he was also brought down in terms of the status in his life. He was a prince, and now he is a slave. But when he was brought down, he then again got up by the fact that he resisted temptation. He was faithful to God, to his will, to his commandments, to his law. But for standing up, he went even more down, right, to the prison. I mean, being a slave and then going into the prison in Egypt, there is just no another bottom after this bottom. So I mean, it's there is no such a word as downest, but it's the lowest. It's the lowest place you could ever be, and it is amazing that from that lowest point, he began ascending. God made it so that he met Pharaoh's butler or cupbearer, right? He made friends with him because he explained his dream. And then when Pharaoh had a dream, the butler recalled his experience, and he said, hey, there is a Jewish boy there in prison, young man who could help you. And Joseph is being brought to Pharaoh and explains the dream, and then Pharaoh makes him, the most important person in Egypt. Pharaoh could not make him a pharaoh, but he was the first one after the pharaoh. So everything was given to him, riches, connections, cars, everything. So he had full control over the whole country. Do you know where the best cars? Like, is it Bentley?
Oh, there are different ones right now. There is no such
Bugatti?
thing as a best car
most
right now.
expensive, yeah.
What's the most?
Well, Bugatti, yeah, Bugatti.
Okay. Do you know where this car is mentioned in this biblical narrative?
This car?
It's not.
It's not. Let me prove it to you. Okay. It's Genesis chapter 41.
Genesis chapter 31?
Chapter 41, verse 43. 41, 43.
Cherry.
So what does it say?
Pharaoh had him riding in the chariot used by his servant.
So it was the second best car in the whole land, right? It's just a sideline, but it was still nice, right? So what does a word car mean?
We have transportation.
Vehicle.
Something with wheels, right? And you don't have to pull it; it pulls you. Right? That's what they had in those days. There was 1 horsepower on it. But it did have wheels, and it was all fancy and stuff. So
Egypt on that time, Egypt had the best chariots and the best horses. In the army, best horses, best chariots.
Okay, what is the way to? What is the path to success?
Stay true to God's law.
Yes. No, we don't have to go through the humbling experience of Joseph to become really blessed financially, in terms of relationships, influences, and so forth. We don't need to, and we better not to. But if we do go through this, remember that at any point, the most low point, the lowest point of your life, there is always a way up. If you stay true to God, to His will, if you run away from evil, concentrate on God, remember that He is everywhere, even in Las Vegas and all other places. God will be true to His word. So let me finish with this passage from Book of Psalms, chapter 84, verse 11.
Can we ask a question before that?
Yeah.
Sure. So, still the question of Daniel. What if he would sin? Would he become to the same position? Would the history be the same?
Yeah, thank you. Of course not. And why? Because you see, the only place that he could possibly meet meet somebody who is close to Pharaoh was that prison. Being a slave, there was not a chance that he could, enter or into proximity of Pharaoh's place, Pharaoh's house, and so forth. So it was God's will. God knew that that butler, that cupbearer would be in prison, and God orchestrated everything and put him together. And we know about it because Joseph is the one who tells it. He says that God made this to happen. It's later in the story. So if he had sex with that woman, of course he would be her favorite. He would, be well off, but he would still, be a slave. And the fact that he stayed true to God's will raised him up, and he became the most powerful person, in the history of Egypt, and well known because he saved the country and so forth. And then not only his position, but he saved the whole, those brothers that sold him, and the whole generation of God's people were saved because of him.
So was it like a test for him? But if God knows everything, and he knew he would pass the test, right?
I mean, God does know everything.
So why bring the test? I had a very interesting Sabbath school with my kids, and they killed me with questions. This could be one of their questions.
Wow.
So why bring a test if you already know that the person's going to pass the test?
But unless the person passes the test, you cannot say that he did or she did.
Okay.
You see, God, for myself, I picture it like this. This is the timeline of history, right? And we go through time like this, with small steps. But God is looking like I am looking from above. So he knows the whole stretch of history. So he does know when you would sin, when you would be victorious and so forth. But it doesn't affect you. His knowledge doesn't affect you. Your choice does. So he does know what choice you would make, but this fact doesn't make you make this choice.
Oh, so if you don't go through those tests, you wouldn't be who you are, so God can't use you.
Yeah, and God's knowledge or information about your path would be different because of your different actions. So God's foreknowledge, God's knowing in advance, that doesn't predestine you. It's vice versa. He knows what you will do, and that's why he structures your opportunities likewise, and his plan likewise.
But Joseph's life seems pretty predestined because God needed somebody to, be there. God needed, he started put him in situations. He kept giving him a road to go.
What did God do?
I'm not sure, but like you said, he had a plan, and God needed him to go to the jail, and God, he put him in the situations. He knew what kind of choices he would make, but he put him in all of those situations.
Yeah.
So doesn't that, what's the word for it?
Predestined?
Predestined. Are all of our lives that way?
The best place that gives us the sequence of God's actions in terms of his knowledge is Romans chapter 8. Let's read verse, I believe it's 29. It's Romans chapter 8.
You read it.
Римлянам 8, Romans chapter 8, verse 29. 29 and 30. 29 and 30. 29 and 30. Oh, let's read 28 through 30. That would be the best. 28 through 30.
По одному, да, или как? При этом мы знаем, что любящий Бога призван по Его изволению. Все содействует к благу. Ибо кого Он предузнал, предопределил быть подобными образу Сына Своего, дабы Он был первородным между многими братьями. А кого Он предопределил, тех и призвал. А кого призвал, тех и оправдал. А кого оправдал, тех и прославил.
Thank you. So what is the sequence? First, God's action is foreknowledge, right? Verse 29 says, for those whom He foreknew, and it means that He knew the decisions they would make. Those whom He foreknew, He predestined, meaning He formulated His plans about that person's life based on the knowledge of what that person would do.
Okay.
So because God, God foreknew, then He predestined, then He did what? Next verse. He called. So God's calling in your life, whether to salvation or otherwise, is based on His knowledge of what you would do and His plan about you.
So basically, calling it's a plan for you. With you.
Let me ask you this thing. Does God want anybody to be a slave?
Probably not.
We know for sure that it's not, because in Romans 12:3 it says that God's will is good and pleasant and perfect. So His will for us is only the best in life. But let's say you have a flaw in your character. Unfortunately, if you don't work on this flaw on your own, the only thing that you would be able to grow would be to go through, as Elena said, through a humbling experience. Right?
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah. This is the only way to grow. This is the only way God could help you grow. So, if Joseph was not a spoiled child to start with, then God would find a better, a softer way to save His people during that time of famine. But God's plan is always based, this is the key, God's plan is based on His knowledge of what we would do. Not vice versa, you see.
It would be like, God's like, oh, well, I need to save my people, how should I do that? Then He looks at us and He's like, oh, Joseph seems like a good option, and because He already knows what Joseph would be at, but then He just throws that into what already exists.
He looks for the best candidate for the job.
And then if Joseph would fail, he would find another candidate.
But he wouldn't fail because he knew that he wouldn't. But then if Joseph just wouldn't be the candidate, and he would be somebody else.
If Joseph failed, then he probably would not be in the biblical narrative, because there is no point of wasting,
Yeah, the other brothers are not. They only in the narrative because of Joseph.
Yeah. So this is, in essence, the relation between our choice and then God's usage of our choice. So our life could be, as Anna said yesterday, it could be amazing, right? It could, because God's will for us is to achieve the highest potential that we can. And but He cannot do it against our will, against our choice. If we make the right choices, He could use us better, in a more powerful or influential capacity. If we make bad choices, then we achieve less, but God still has forgiveness, right? Even this path shows that Joseph had when he had to go through this humbling experience, he learned, and he became a man who he became because of making the right choices. He he was sinning, right? When he lived at his father's house. Then he stopped sinning. And God was able to use him. The last verse that I wanted to share with you, book of Psalms, chapter 84, verse 11. Verse 11. For the Lord God is a sun and a shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless. Let me read it in Russian. Ходящих в непорочности он не лишает благ. No good thing does he, God, withhold from those whose walk is blameless.